They laughed when I told them I was starting my own business. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh people make when they're surprised. The kind that makes you feel like you've accidentally become the entertainment for the entire room. My uncle put down his drink, looked around the dining table, and said, "So let me get this straight. You quit a stable job to sell drawings on the internet?" My cousin laughed first. Then my aunt. Then my brother, who had spent the last 10 years making me feel like I was the family disappointment, leaned back in his chair and said, "At least someone has to be brave enough to tell him the truth. Not everyone is built for the real world." Everyone laughed again. My mother looked down at her plate. My father said nothing. And I sat there at the family gathering with a smile on my face, holding a glass of water so tightly that my hand was shaking under the table. They thought I was failing. They thought I was irresponsible. They thought I was too sensitive, too quiet, too unrealistic, and too weak to stand up for myself. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last 11 months building something in silence. And exactly 6 months after that dinner, I was going to receive a phone call that would change the way every single person at that table looked at me. But this isn't a story about screaming at family members. It isn't about exposing anyone online, embarrassing them publicly, or pretending I suddenly became better than them. This is the story of how I stopped begging people to respect me. And let my peace, my boundaries, and my success do all the talking. Welcome back to Calm Verdict Stories. If you enjoy real lifestyle stories about family drama, karma, betrayal, boundaries, growth, and life lessons, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because today's story is for anyone who has ever sat at a family table and felt like they didn't belong there. My name is Ethan. I was 31 years old when this happened. At the time, I worked as a product designer for a mid-sized software company in Denver. It was a decent job. Good health insurance. Predictable salary. A manager who mostly left me alone. From the outside, I looked stable. But inside, I was exhausted. Every day felt the same. I woke up, drove through traffic, spent 8 hours designing things I didn't care about, came home, heated up whatever was in my fridge, and stared at the ceiling wondering how long I could keep living a life that didn't feel like mine. The truth was, I had always wanted to create my own work. I loved illustration, branding, digital art. Turning ideas into something people could actually see and feel. For years, I had designed logos and websites for friends on the side. Then friends started referring me to other people. Then strangers online started reaching out. At first, it was just a few $100s a month. Then it became a few thousand. And eventually, I had one client offer me more for a single project than I made in 2 months at my regular job. That was when I started thinking seriously about leaving. But my family didn't believe in things like that. They believed in safe careers, predictable promotions, mortgages, job titles. Things you could explain at a dinner party without anyone raising an eyebrow. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden child. He was 36, worked in corporate finance, owned a large house in the suburbs, drove a luxury SUV, and had the kind of confident voice that made people assume he was right even when he wasn't. My parents treated his opinion like it came from a boardroom. If Marcus said the economy was bad, everyone worried. If Marcus said a neighborhood was declining, everyone suddenly agreed. If Marcus said someone was making a bad decision, that person usually became the topic of conversation for the rest of the night. And I had been that person for most of my life. When I went to art school, Marcus told me I was wasting my potential. When I took my first design job, he said I was lucky anyone paid me to make things look pretty. When I moved into my small apartment downtown instead of buying a house, he said I was financially immature. And when I told the family I was thinking about starting a design studio of my own, well, that was apparently the funniest thing they had heard all year. The gathering was at my Aunt Linda's house the weekend before Thanksgiving. It was one of those family events that looked perfect from the outside. The house smelled like roasted food and cinnamon candles. Kids were running through the hallway. Football played quietly on the television. Everyone was dressed just nicely enough to pretend they weren't trying. I almost didn't go. I had spent the whole week dealing with a difficult client, finishing a large branding project, and trying to decide whether I was actually ready to leave my job. But my mother called me 3 times. "Please come," she said. It would mean a lot to me if everyone was there. So I went. And for the first hour, it was fine. I talked to my cousins. I helped set the table. I asked my aunt about her garden. I avoided Marcus as much as possible. Then dinner started. Someone asked what everyone had been doing lately. My cousin Claire had gotten engaged. My uncle was planning a trip to Italy. Marcus had just been promoted. And then my aunt looked at me and smiled. "What about you, Ethan? Your mom says you've been doing some kind of freelance work?" It was a simple question. But I could feel the room shift. I should have known better than to answer honestly. Still, I was tired of acting embarrassed about something I was proud of. So I said, "Yeah. I've been doing branding and design work for small businesses. It's been going really well, actually. I'm thinking about leaving my full-time job next year and focusing on it." There was a pause. Then Marcus smiled. Not kindly. "Oh, you mean the little side projects?" I looked at him. "It's more than that now." "Really?" he said. "How much more?" I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted numbers. He wanted details. He wanted to turn my future into a spreadsheet and find the flaw in it. "I'm doing okay," I said. Marcus laughed. "That means not okay." A few people chuckled. My uncle asked, "But you have benefits at your current job, right?" "Yes." "And a retirement plan?" "Yes." "And you're considering walking away from that to design logos for coffee shops?" "It's not just logos," I said. Marcus held up both hands. "Hey, I'm not judging. I'm just saying, this family has seen these dreams before. People watch a few success stories online and suddenly think they're entrepreneurs." That one landed. Because everyone knew what he meant. My father had tried opening a small hardware store 20 years earlier. It failed within 2 years. The family still talked about it like it was proof that ambition was dangerous. I looked at my dad. He was staring at his plate. Then my Aunt Linda said, "Ethan, honey, there's nothing wrong with being creative. But maybe don't throw away stability just because you're bored." My cousin added, "You could always do it on weekends. You don't have to make it your whole personality." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That's the problem," he said. "Ethan has always wanted to be special. He doesn't want a normal life like the rest of us." The table went quiet for a second. Then he smiled and added, "But who knows? Maybe he'll be famous someday. We can all say we knew him when he was still borrowing money from Mom." That was a lie. I had not borrowed money from my mother since college. But my mother didn't correct him. She just looked uncomfortable and said, "Marcus," he shrugged. "What?" "I'm joking." That sentence. "I'm joking." It's amazing how often cruel people use that phrase as a shield. They say something meant to humiliate you, then act offended when you react. I could feel my chest tightening. I wanted to say something sharp. I wanted to remind Marcus that he had called me 3 months earlier asking if I knew someone who could redesign the website for his friend's company. I wanted to remind him that the little side projects he mocked had already brought in more money that year than he knew. I wanted to tell everyone that I had savings, clients, a business plan. A contract waiting to be signed. But I didn't. I just put my fork down. I looked at Marcus and said, I hope you're right to be concerned. But I'm willing to take responsibility for my own decisions. Then I stood up. My mother followed me into the kitchen. Please don't leave, she whispered. Your brother didn't mean it like that. I looked at her for a long time. Yes, he did. She didn't answer. And that hurt more than Marcus's joke. Because I wasn't expecting him to understand me. But some part of me had still hoped my mother would defend me. I left without dessert. I drove home in silence. And when I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post a vague message online. I opened my laptop. Then I made a list. The first thing on it was simple: stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. The second was build quietly. For the next 6 months, that's exactly what I did. I kept my job for 3 more months while I prepared everything properly. I saved aggressively. I met with an accountant. I registered my business. I built a professional website. I created contracts, pricing systems, timelines, and processes. I stopped saying yes to clients who wanted cheap work. I stopped taking calls from people who only wanted to pick my brain. I stopped telling family members what I was planning. Most importantly, I stopped needing them to approve. That was the hardest part. For years, I had imagined some future moment when Marcus would finally say, I was wrong about you. I thought I needed my parents to be proud of me. I thought I needed my relatives to understand that I wasn't lazy or irresponsible. But the more I worked, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Their approval was never the goal. It was just the thing I had been using to measure whether I was allowed to believe in myself. And I was done doing that. 3 months after the dinner, I signed my largest client. A regional outdoor company wanted a full rebrand: their website, product packaging, social media visuals, and marketing materials. It was a 6-month contract. The payment was enough to cover nearly a year of my living expenses. I read the contract 5 times before signing it. Then I sat in my apartment and laughed. Not because I had proven Marcus wrong. Not yet. I laughed because I had proven something to myself. I could do this. A month later, I gave notice at my job. My manager was surprised but supportive. He told me I was one of the most reliable people on his team and that if I ever wanted to come back, there would be a place for me. That mattered. It reminded me that not everyone saw me the way my family did. The first few months of working for myself were hard. There were days I doubted everything. There were invoices that came late. There were clients who changed their minds 12 times. There were nights I worked until 2 in the morning because I had underestimated how much one project would take. But I loved it. I loved waking up and knowing that my work belonged to me. I loved seeing a business owner's face when they saw their new brand for the first time. I loved the fear of it, strangely enough. Because the fear meant I was doing something real. Then came the next family gathering. It was my grandmother's 75th birthday. I seriously considered skipping it. But my grandmother had always been kind to me. She was one of the only people who had never treated my choices like a problem to solve. So I went. This time, I showed up differently. Not in some dramatic way. I didn't arrive in an expensive car. I didn't wear designer clothes. I didn't bring documents showing my income or announce my client list. I wore a simple dark jacket, brought flowers for my grandmother, and helped carry trays of food into the house. Marcus arrived late, as usual. He walked in talking loudly about a work deal. Everyone gathered around him immediately. I watched from the kitchen as he described his promotion, his bonuses, his new responsibilities. and I genuinely felt nothing. No jealousy. No need to compete. No anger. Just distance. At dinner, my Aunt Linda asked me the same question she had asked months earlier. "So, Ethan, are you still doing the design thing?" The table got quiet. Marcus looked at me with that familiar half-smile. I could almost see him getting ready, waiting for me to admit I had failed. I took a sip of water. Then I said, "Yes. It's going well." My uncle asked, "Still working from home?" "Mostly," I said. "I have a small studio now." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A studio?" "Yeah. What kind of work are you doing?" I thought about giving him the short answer. But then I remembered my list. "Stop explaining yourself." So I said, "I work with businesses that value design. I'm happy with it." That was all. No numbers. No names. No defense. No invitation for his opinion. Marcus waited for more. When I didn't give it to him, he laughed softly. "Well, as long as you're happy." But he didn't sound amused anymore. Later that night, after dinner, my cousin Claire found me outside on the back patio. "I saw your work online," she said. I looked at her. "You did?" She nodded. "Your stuff is incredible. I had no idea you were doing all that." "Thanks." She hesitated. "Marcus showed my fiancé one of your projects last month. He was trying to find a designer for someone at work." I laughed once. "Really?" "Yeah. He didn't know I followed your studio account." That was the first moment I understood something. Marcus had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. He had seen my work. He had seen that I was growing. He had seen that I wasn't just selling drawings on the internet. And he had still chosen to humiliate me at that dinner. That wasn't concern. That was insecurity. A few weeks after my grandmother's birthday, I received an email from a property management company. They were renovating a small historic building downtown and turning it into creative office spaces. One of my clients had recommended me to design the branding for the entire project. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. The project lasted 8 months. By the end of it, my studio had grown from just me working at a desk in my apartment to a small team of 4 freelancers and contractors. We had more work than I could handle alone. I rented a real office. Not huge. Not flashy. But it had tall windows, exposed brick, and enough room for a long table where my team could sit together. The first day I got the keys, I stood in the empty space for nearly 20 minutes. I thought about that dinner. About Marcus laughing. About my mother staring at her plate. About every time someone had called me unrealistic. And I felt something I didn't expect. Gratitude. Not for the humiliation itself. No one deserves that. But because it had forced me to stop waiting for permission. The real revenge wasn't becoming successful. The real revenge was becoming free. A year after that first humiliating family gathering, my parents invited everyone over for Christmas dinner. I almost said no. But my grandmother was there, and I wanted to see her. Marcus was there too. His company had gone through layoffs. He hadn't lost his job, but he had been moved into a role he clearly didn't like. For the first time in his life, he seemed smaller. Not less valuable. Just less certain. During dinner, he was quieter than usual. After dessert, he found me alone in my parents' kitchen. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Claire told me about your office." "Yeah," I said. "It's been good." He nodded. "I guess you really made it work." I waited. He looked uncomfortable. I was hard on you. That was not an apology. Not really. But it was more than I expected. I could have made him suffer in that moment. I could have reminded him of every joke. Every insult. Every time he made me feel like I didn't deserve to take up space in the family. But I didn't. I just said, you were. He looked down. Then I added, but I don't need you to understand my life anymore. He looked at me. And for the first time, he had nothing clever to say. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me most. I wasn't interested in punishing him. I just didn't want his approval. Not anymore. A few months later, Marcus called me. He said a colleague of his was launching a consulting firm and needed branding help. He asked if I was taking new clients. I paused before answering. Then I said, I can have my assistant send over our inquiry form. There was silence. I think he expected a favor. Maybe he thought family meant I would drop everything, give him a discount, or be grateful that he finally acknowledged my work. But I had learned boundaries by then. So I treated him the same way I treated everyone else. Professionally. Respectfully. Without resentment. His colleague ended up becoming a client. They paid my standard rate. They loved the work. And Marcus never made another joke about my business again. My parents changed too, slowly. My mother eventually apologized for not standing up for me that night. She said she had been trying to avoid conflict. I told her I understood, but avoiding conflict had still left me alone. She cried. And I forgave her. But I also stopped pretending that silence doesn't hurt. That was another boundary I had to learn. You don't have to hate people to stop accepting the way they treat you. You don't have to scream to make a point. You don't need a dramatic revenge plan. Sometimes the calmest revenge is building a life that no longer depends on the people who tried to make you feel small. Sometimes it's answering disrespect with distance. Sometimes it's refusing to argue with people who only listen so they can respond. And sometimes it's sitting at the same family table where they once laughed at you, and realizing their laughter no longer has any power over you. Because you know who you are. You know what you built. And you finally understand that your worth was never something they had the authority to decide. So if your family doubts you, mocks your dreams, or treats your choices like a joke, remember this. You do not need to prove yourself in the middle of an argument. You do not need to explain your vision to people committed to misunderstanding it. Build quietly. Set boundaries. Let time reveal the truth. And when success comes, don't use it to become cruel. Use it to become free. Thank you for watching Calm Verdict Stories. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Have you ever been humiliated by family members, and what did you do afterward? Subscribe for more stories about karma, family drama, self-respect, boundaries, growth, and life lessons. Until next time, stay calm, stay focused, and never let anyone else define your worth.